Hi, I'm Carrie Cuss, RLA Director and Consultant Trainer. I wanted to start a short series of videos aimed at providing practical guides to landlords. And I want to start with this first one, looking at the issue of fire safety. And the best way to do that is for me to take you on location. So we are going to go to a 3-bedroomed terraced property. Now, this property is currently vacant. It's about to be let to a family on a joint contract between the parents, and there's one small child. And it's a single dwelling, okay? So a single dwelling in terms of fire safety has to comply with requirements under the smoke alarm and carbon monoxide detector regulations, which it does. It's got a smoke alarm on each habitable floor and it's got a CO detector near the boiler, okay? And it's compliant. But what's interesting is that when we look at this 3-bedroom terrace, if we consider if that property was to be let to 3 sharers, all of a sudden it becomes a small HMO. And with it comes the requirements for it to comply with HMO manager regulations, one of which involving fire safety. And also, if it were to be leased on a room-to-room contracts, it would also have to comply with the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. Now, as I said, the legislation's all well and good, and we have a fabulous online course that can teach you all of the theory that you need. But what I want to do today is I want to show you how this applies in practice when you're walking around your properties to identify those risks and see what you need to do to ensure that you're compliant. So let's go. As part of this series looking at fire safety, I've been taking a look around this 3-bedroom terrace property, and I've been considering to myself, well, if this was let to 3 sharers and we had to comply with HMO manager regulations and we had to comply with the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, what more would I need to do? And I'm going to first of all bring your attention to the cellar. That's my starting point. Now you'll see that it's got a pretty substantial wooden door, and that helps with fire safety. It certainly does help. It's not a 30-minute fire door, I might add. You might be wondering why I'm starting with the cellar. Well, it's pretty standard that if you have a cellar in a property, you are going to need a 30-minute fire door sealing it off. The reason being is that any cellar, you know, whether it's used on a regular basis, perhaps because it's got say a fridge freezer or a tumble dryer down there, or even if it's not used regularly, even if it is purely just used for storage, the chances are that cellar is going to have electrics running through it, and therefore there is a potential risk of fire. That problem is worsened by the fact that it isn't a habitable space. If a fire starts in a cellar, it could be absolutely raging for quite some time with the tenants having no knowledge of it, especially if they're upstairs asleep, okay? So the first thing that you need to think about with cellars is 30-minute fire doors to the entrance to the cellar, okay? You may even want to go that little bit further and think about putting 30-minute plasterboard in to the ceiling of the cellar to give that little bit extra protection. Risk number 2 is to do with the locks on your external exit doors. So this again is the cellar door. Let's consider that there's been a fire raging down there for some time, and naturally it's going to impact on the living room space, okay? We're coming through here the house, and this is our front exit door. So if you consider tenants are coming down the stairs, they're desperately trying to get out in the event of the fire, they, I would hope, are not going to attempt to come through this area here, because this is going to be unstable due to the fire beneath in the cellar. So they're going to be looking at getting out of this door here. Now you can see that we have keys hung in the door. Great, if your keys are there, you can get out. What happens if your keys aren't there and your keys are in the kitchen? The best thing to think about when you're thinking about exit routes on your main doors is putting on thumb turn locks. Now, thumb turn locks are sometimes called Yale locks. It basically, there's no requirement for a key. You need a key to get in it from the outside, but then it's literally just a flip like that to be able to get out. And it provides that quick and easy exit route. So one of the main fire risks in any property is around the kitchen area and hobs, cookers. Naturally, this is always going to be a greater fire risk. Now, you know, this property it's a decent little property. It's got a good, well-fitted kitchen with plenty of work surfaces around it, splashback tiles. Not all properties are that good. Some of them there will be fire risks that are immediate, especially if you have cookers that are buttered straight up to a high kitchen unit, for example. But this property is reasonably low risk. What you do need to consider that if this property was leased to sharers, you may need to supply some level of firefighting equipment. Now, it's fair to say that when we're looking at fire safety, it's more about looking at fire escape rather than firefighting. And there are very few local authorities now that would actually request that you put a fire extinguisher in a property. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty standard to say that most would be looking at you putting in a fire blanket in the kitchen. So it would need to be hung up, probably somewhere like there on that wall, and you would need to make sure that it's maintained and serviced. You've got to think about detection systems. So as I said, this property, it complies with the smoke and CO alarm regulations. It has a battery operated smoke alarm on each floor and they're in working order. But if this was a HMO, it would be quite likely that the local authorities would want to see mains wired, interlinked smoke detectors. Now again, I would urge landlords to reference the LACORS fire guide. This provides you with substantial guidance on the types of detection systems that you need depending on the layout of your property. There's things to consider, for example, if you put 30-minute fire door on this bedroom here, and if you include intermittent strips, then any smoke building in that bedroom is not going to reach that smoke alarm quite as easily. So you need to think about your fire detection systems in relation to any 30-minute fire doors and in relation to the layout of the property and indeed in relation to the types of tenants that you're renting your property to in terms of vulnerability, for example. One of the questions that I get asked a lot by landlords is with regards to fire escape through a window. Often landlords will say to me, well, do I need to bother with things like thumb-turn locks? Because I have windows, such as this one, that open out far enough to allow an exit route for a tenant. I would like you to consider that as a last-ditch option, really. The primary option is to get the tenants out through the normal method by which they come in, i.e. a door. You've got to think that when tenants, or anybody really that was experiencing a fire, they're panic-stricken, they're overcome with smoke. It's natural to try to exit through the route by which you come in. So throwing yourself out of a window, such as this one, isn't necessarily going to be the first thing that a tenant thinks about, okay? However, I appreciate that the layouts of properties can vary greatly. And sometimes it's just not always possible to provide that sealed route of exit. And sometimes you do need to turn your attention to windows such as this. In that case, what I would like landlords to do is cross-reference to the LACORS fire guide. Now, the LACORS guide has guidance on where the exit point is it a safe place of safety? And also it looks at the drop from the window to the ground to establish whether or not it's reasonable to expect somebody to jump out there in the event of a fire. So just think that is your secondary exit route, not your primary. I've spoken to you already about fire doors on cellar heads, but it's also worth talking about fire doors in the rest of the property. It's quite essential really when you're looking at producing a sealed route of exit for tenants. Now, we've already discussed that front door and the fact that that currently requires a key to get out. If it had a thumb-turn lock, then all the better. That would mean that tenants would be able to exit quickly. But we do need to think about the door here that leads into the living room. Now, if we have a fire that's raging in the kitchen or the cellar or the living room, that door there, if that was a 30 or even a 60-minute fire door, would give an awful lot more protection to tenants to allow them to exit out of this door here. We may also want to consider 30-minute fire doors on the bedroom doors. Let's just take you upstairs a tip. So we could consider putting fire doors here. As a minimum, we want substantial, well-fitting wooden doors, which currently these are.